Well, good afternoon. My name is John Kenyon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization. I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 Iowa City Book Festival. We've had some wonderful events this week, and if you missed anything, you can visit www.iowациtybookfestival.org for information and links that will allow you to catch up by watching recordings of this week's events. These include sessions with James Autry, Thomas Frank, Jill McCorkle, and Ron Rash. This year's festival is made possible because of support from the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, and Iowa Public Radio. Today's event is with Erika Billerbeck, an Iowa DNR officer who will discuss her new book from the University of Iowa Press, Wildland Sentinel. If you have a question at any time during today's program, you can click Ask a Question below the video and submit one. If you're interested in buying a copy of Erika's book, you can click the Buy the Book/Donate button, which will take you to a page with a link to buy the book from our friends at Prairie Lights Books in Iowa City. In addition, you can learn about how to support the City of Literature, which helps us to continue to offer free programming like the Iowa City Book Festival. Now I would like to introduce Holly Carver, series editor for the University of Iowa Press's Bur Oak Series, who will moderate today's event. Holly.
John, thanks. Good. Okay, Erika. So most of you, I would think, listening would know Erika as the author of the Warden's Diary for Iowa Outdoors Magazine for about 10 years. So she wrote that column for a long time, and I bet a lot of you read it in the magazine. Erika, you grew up in Northeast Iowa. You've got a degree in biology from Luther. Then you went into environmental education and you were a county naturalist. Then for some mad reason, you wanted to transition to conservation law enforcement, which does seem kind of like a contradiction in terms. And you went to work for the Wisconsin DNR as a deputy conservation warden. You went to law enforcement school in Wisconsin, and you won't tell people this, but I will. You graduated at the top of your class, president. Then you worked in Wisconsin for a bit, and then you came into Iowa as a full-time conservation officer. First in Webster County and Calhoun County, and then you transferred to Johnson County some years ago. You're at McBride now. You recently promoted to sergeant, which is great. You've got some nice awards, Boating Officer of the Year, the Outdoor Heritage Award, which I think is very cool, Teamwork Award. And you live in rural Solon with a husband, 2 kids, as you say, 3 dogs and too many chickens. So why don't you read from the book, and we've got questions for you. The thing that, first question I have, though, that kind of sets the stage, the state conservation officer, which I see as a contradiction in terms I envision somebody on the trail telling little school kids about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. And so when I first heard about your manuscript, I thought, okay, this is going to be very sweet. It's not. You're working in law enforcement. Conservation, unfortunately, you don't get to spend as much of your time doing actual hands-on conservation work. You're conserving the bigger picture. How do you? It's a contradiction. How do you wrestle with that? Your job, environment, and then people who are doing a lot of damage to the things you want to protect.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it is that a conservation officer does. Another officer and I went out to lunch the other day and grabbed a burrito from a restaurant, and the person checking us out asked my partner if he saves animals, if that was his job to save animals. And that's one common misconception, is that we're out there, just getting injured animals and doctoring them back to health and saving animals individually like that. That's not really what we do. The other main question we get is, why do you carry a gun? Or since when does the DNR carry a gun? And so I'll get into that a little bit, but people think it's to protect us from, I guess, animals that are going to attack us or something.
Yeah,
But
all those wild animals in Iowa. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the thing we deal with most is people, and not necessarily animals so much. We are there, the whole goal of the job is to protect our natural resources, and that the way we have to go about that is by dealing with the people that use the natural resources. So I just have to keep that in mind when I go to work, is that I'm going to have to deal with people. Sometimes it's not easy, but the ultimate goal is to do things and get people to respect our natural resources. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for logging on to this. I was worried that I would log on and there would be 2 people listed down in the bottom, and it would be my parents. So I'm glad that people have logged on, even though it's a beautiful day outside. What I plan to do is I'm hoping that you guys will ask a lot of questions. I think I'll do better at this if you'll just start typing in some questions there on the side or on the ask a question button, and we'll go from there. But I did want to talk about, I'm going to read a couple sections of this book, and I wanted to talk about, some of those misconceptions that we have in our work and what we really do and what I cover in the book to kind of tell my story. So one of the things that hunters are required to do in Iowa before they purchase a hunting license is take a hunter education class. And part of my job is each of those classes that happens in Johnson County, I have to go in and talk to the students about all the hunting laws that apply when they go hunting. And I remember one class, usually I talk for about an hour, and I went in and was talking about how you have to purchase a hunting license. Depending on what species you're going to hunt, you have to have different tags and different stamps and things like that. And I went off on a big spiel about making sure that you tag your deer. And, I went through my whole hour-long talk, and I got to the very end, and some kid raised their hand and said, "What's a hunting license?" So I realized that maybe I need to start at the very, ground level to make sure that people know what it is I do. So the first thing I'm going to do is just read the first page and a half of this book, and it'll kind of give you an idea of kind of generally what it is that we're doing out there. So this is the very first section of the book. On the day I was sworn in as a conservation officer, excuse me, you could almost drink the sweltering July air. As I stood in a stuffy conference room in the Wallace State Office building, getting a badge pinned to my chest, heat hazed from the cement parking lots in downtown Des Moines. Outside of the city, corn plants had reached heights of over 5 feet, their breath visible as the leaves rustled with rapid growth. The heavy air pressed down on the rolling lush hills of western Iowa and blew across the central plains before tumbling over the eastern bluffs into the eddies of the Mississippi River. Iowa is not known for vast expanses of wilderness. There are no stunning mountain ranges, white sand beaches, vast tracts of forests, or deep, awe-inspiring canyons. It is a landscape once carved by prehistoric glaciers and more recently transformed by humans and agriculture. Iowa is a deeply altered place. Natural grace is found in smaller bites here. The space is etched between the petals of pale purple coneflowers dotting the roadsides, cattail mazes along marsh edges, and the silhouettes of solitary oaks, stout and twisted in a pasture. My first assignment as an Iowa conservation officer sent me to Webster County in the central part of the state. There, the wind is a relentless presence that bites your face in winter and burns it all summer long. Where there were once vast expanses of prairies and wetland potholes banked by oak savannas, there are now crop fields extending flatly to the horizon, where they meet the sky's arc in hazy summer heat. Gravel roads stretch out in a grid of almost perfect square mile segments, hemming in the corn and bean fields in neat computer-generated rows. One of the few places biological diversity finds a foothold is in the occasional roadside ditch, and even that's a crapshoot. Many ditches are either mowed or being slowly consumed by extra rows of crops. I am an Iowa native. I know the need for nuance and a discerning eye when seeking out natural places in some parts of the state. But as a newly badged officer, standing in the bed of my pickup for a better view, I still saw the stark landscape as impossible. I found myself wondering if I would be able to find the natural resources I was sworn to safeguard. Later, I transferred farther east to Johnson County, an area with more natural and cultural diversity. Tucked between two urban areas, the northern section of my territory encompasses a large wildlife area, 2 rivers, a sizable federal impoundment, a large university, and an endless supply of headaches. The southern half of the territory is home to both large-scale farming operations where combines the size of semi-trucks trundle over the fields, and to Amish families whose horses and buggies kick up dust on dirt roads. My job in this varied territory is a tightrope act in which I feel always on the verge of plunging over one side or the other. When I do fall, I find myself either splashing into the pool of modernity and all its conflicts, where progressive opinions hold sway, or into the land of tradition, where resistance to change is steadfast. Conservation officers are tasked with protecting the state's natural resources, mainly by way of law enforcement. In Iowa, conservation officers are state peace officers, which means we can enforce any laws of the state. Our primary focus is on those laws that could impact the state's wildlife, land, and waters. But although we work for the land, we spend much of our time dealing with people and their problems. In Nature Noir, his memoir of 14 years he spent working in a pair of river canyons slated to be inundated by a dam, law enforcement park ranger Jordan Fisher Smith summarized a conservation officer's duties like this. You protect the land from the people from the land, the people from each other, and the people from themselves. It's what you're trained to do without even thinking, a reflexive and unconditional act. If you're lucky, you get assigned to people who seem worth saving and land in waters whose situation is not hopeless. If not, you save them anyway. And maybe in time, saving them will make them worth it. So I just thought that Jordan Fisher Smith nailed it on the head as far as what it is we're supposed to do, And I tried to put into the book lots of stories of me, I guess, basically attempting to do that. So that kind of summarizes what the book is about. Is just about my work as a conservation officer and how I go about my job every day. I wanted to touch really briefly, Holly, on why I wrote this book. She mentioned that I wrote the Warden's Diary column for Iowa Outdoors magazine for about 10 years, and at first, I was very nervous writing that I didn't know what I was doing, or I wouldn't have stories to tell. And I found as time went on that it really became really one of the most satisfying parts of my job was writing that column. And I got a lot of feedback from the public and hunters that I ran into in the field. The magazine went through some changes, and at that point, I just decided that I would try working on a book because I wanted to be able to tell some of the stories in a more in-depth way. And a lot of the stories, all the stories I wrote for Iowa Outdoors had to be family-friendly stories. And not everything that happens to me is family-friendly. So I wanted to be able to have an outlet for some of those stories to go to as well. And aside from that, I've just been a reader my whole life, and it was always like a dream of mine to write a book. So that was the other reason for doing it. And also to kind of inform readers about, I think people just have no idea what it is we're doing every day. And I thought it'd be helpful to be able to tell our story as a group. So are there questions yet? No.
There is one question, Erika, which is one of my questions too. Especially for people who've read the book and are beginning to understand that your job is a little more complicated than it might appear. What's the most rewarding part of your job? At the end of the day, what makes you feel good about your job?
I don't know if it's the most rewarding, but probably one of my favorite parts of the job is just being able to put together a good case. And that's kind of basically detective work. So I say it's maybe not the most rewarding because sometimes, as I talk about in the book, I end up going to court and things get tossed or let out. But the process of putting together a good case and doing a good investigation and trying to fit these puzzle pieces together in order to take to court or in order to take to the county attorney's office, that's kind of a satisfying thing for me to do. I kind of like just diving into those details and trying to sort out what happened, when I wasn't there out in the middle of the night in some cornfield. Then
well, one of your awards was Case of the Year. Is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, the Case of the Year is actually in the book. Usually the Case of the Year covers one specific case that an officer worked that maybe resulted in so many charges and so many dollars worth of funds paid back to the state for the animals that were illegally taken. But in my case, they gave me the Case of the Year award because of all the problems that we were having at the Hawkeye Wildlife Area, and all of the work that we put in trying to get those problems at least somewhat eliminated. And I do write about a lot of that in the book. So
I found it a really moving part of the book. It was also really depressing.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, I'm just being naive about it. I just am surprised at the level of damage that people do in public areas. I shouldn't be surprised, but so that was is that the one? Well, wait, I won't give away. I won't spoil it. Never mind.
Yeah. There was a few parts to that case, or the Case of the Year, and one of those was probably what you were just going to say. But
yeah, it was very funny, but
yeah, I really, for the book, I really aimed I wanted to have more than just a collection of stories between two covers, and I wanted it to be able to tie together. A lot of game warden books that are out there are just full of like all these kind of funny stories, and that is part of it, to have some of these funny stories, and some of the things that happened at Hawkeye are funny, but I also wanted to include things that we deal with and are not funny at all. So I tried to include characters that recurred, like the park ranger at Lake McBride State Park that I work with quite often, and tried to tie the book together with having characters that come into play throughout the book. And also I wanted to be sure to include some, I guess, what I would think of as nature writing, like natural history bits about Iowa, and some of my memoir things to kind of put me into place in the book too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you did a great job merging all of those various effects. Couple of questions popped up. One, this is interesting question. Do you have a memory of, as a child, some memory that might have spurred your desire to become a conservation officer? Was there any epiphany about your love for nature and wanting to protect the environment?
Not really, because I didn't know conservation officers existed when I was young. Yeah. I wanted to go into, as I got into college, I wanted to do something. I knew I wanted to do something outdoors. And I thought I wanted to do environmental education, which I did for a while. So, and that just stems from, as a family, we did a lot of hiking and camping and being outdoors, but I was not brought up as a hunter. I was not brought up as a fisherman. And so those are the kind of things I learned later. But so I don't really have like a specific memory other than I was just outdoors a lot, playing and, exploring around. So I don't know if you want me to read another section or not, but I thought about reading a section about Jace Travers, and that.
Yeah, he's my favorite. So why don't you read that, and then we've got some good questions. So, but go ahead and do that.
So I changed all the names in the book, including the officers that I work with. The person that works as a park ranger out at Lake McBride, in the book he's called Jace Travers. And I just wanted to read a little section that kind of introduces Jace and why Jace is a good guy to work with for me specifically. So I'll read that. It's just a short section here. Okay. Every law enforcement officer holds a place on what I think of as a magnetic spectrum, an imaginary bell curve. One has little control over where one sits on it. Some officers located at the far end possess an extremely strong polarizing force. They are known as ship magnets. A complicated equation determines one location on the magnetic curve. Factors include such variables as territory assignment, doggedness, genetic mutation, and cosmic accident to the power of 3. The only way a shift on the magnetic continuum can occur during the course of a career is by changing one of those factors. Even then, of course, one can do little to change the essential esoteric nature of one's being. Whether you find yourself on the uphill slope of the ship magnet bell or on the downhill, it doesn't take long to figure out your lot. The bigger question is whether being a ship magnet is a blessing or a curse. I learned early in my career that I was the polar opposite of a ship magnet. At my distant end of the spectrum, life was dull. Months would pass in a blur of tedium, driving, hoping, searching, watching, and driving some more. While ship magnet officers are always close at hand when something exciting or unusual occurs, I'm usually the one stuck behind a slow-moving tractor 6 miles away. I arrive just as everyone else is leaving. While magnets struggle to keep up with accumulating case incident reports, some days I struggle simply to find a hunter to check. Magnets have a thrilling new story to tell every time you talk to them. I recycle the same old tale until eyes glaze over. Different strategies can be employed to counter such weak magnetic poles, lest the poor soul languish too long in the depths of boredom. I've tried them all with varying success, strategically placing myself in the vicinity of a ship magnet in an effort to poach off his magnetism works sometimes. The only snag is that my oppositional magnetism can strangely overpower the ship magnet's pull. When that happens, it may become necessary to remove myself from her company entirely until just long enough for the magnet to drum up some business. Only then will I step back in for my share of the action. It's a perverse and maddening loop. Jace Travers, the park ranger for Lake McBride State Park, is familiar with my embarrassing condition and is usually willing to help me out. Jace is always wading in shit up to his knees. That kind of gives you an idea of, I guess, why I work with Jace.
I loved all your stories about him. We've got some really good questions, Erika. So this one's kind of loaded, and I don't know where you want to go with it, given that you do work for the state. Someone has a really good question about, do you have interactions with agribusiness, with big ag, with, from my point of view, people who are very happy to see Iowa as a monocrop culture. There's a lot of money involved, obviously, in big ag. Do you have interactions, beyond maybe pesticide drift, or I can't think of anything else directly? Do you have interactions with big farmers?
I mean, personally, that's not part of my job. The DNR is divided into two sections: the conservation and rec division, which is what I work for, and then there's the environmental division. There's fisheries, wildlife, conservation and rec, and then the other side of it is environmental, and those are the people that I believe would typically
right.
with the end of it, people above my rank.
Yeah, so people who are really out there wrestling with erosion and water quality and groundwater.
Yeah, I mean, I get those calls about, spills and things like that, but those are forwarded on to the environmental people to handle. So really my role in it is just passing them to the right person.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I wish I had all kinds of control over stuff like that, but I don't.
I wish you did too. Yeah. I had a question about your chapter about the floods of 2008, but somebody else asked, what about the derecho, and what effect did that have on McBride? I haven't been out there since the storm.
Yeah, it closed McBride for a while. They had a lot of trees down over the roads, and it just took them time to get them removed so that people could get through on the roadways. And I think they also had to go through and assess, on trails, if there was going to be a widowmaker hanging over the trail to make sure that we didn't have trees crashing down onto somebody.
Were you out there during this?
I was not involved in that at all.
Yeah.
I know a few of our officers did go over and help with the cleanup, but I did not do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that Palisades State Park was even more heavily hit than
Wapsipinicon, I think, really got hammered too.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, but
yeah, it would have been scary to be camping. You know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then what about the flood? Your chapter about the flood is, just watching the water rise and in the reservoir. That must have been really, it went on and on too. But
Yeah.
what are your memories of that?
I mean, a lot of it, what I remember is what I write about in the book is just, I was in the same boat kind of as everybody else, and that we were waiting for that water to go over the lip. And the only difference, I think, was, and I talk about this some in the book too, but people in my job or in, other jobs, I think we maybe don't want to admit that there was part of us, or part of me anyway.
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead and say
it. Obviously, we don't want anybody's property to be ruined or anybody to get hurt, but there's a little part of me that wanted, like, you're just waiting for this water to go over, and kind of inside a little bit hoping that it will. See what kind of chaos ensues after that. And obviously we were able to see what happened, and now I'm over it, and I'm not going to wish for anything like that again. But our role in that disaster was launching our boat in downtown Coralville, and also at the water treatment plant in Iowa City, trying to keep the pump running and taking workers out to the pumps, and trying to keep people safe, like keep people from going onto the reservoir. We were helping evacuate apartment buildings out of Coralville and getting people to safety from there that had not left their apartments. So that's a lot of what we were doing with that.
Yeah. So you were out of the park doing a lot.
Yeah, I don't typically work in the park. I help out in the park, but we have park rangers and we have conservation officers, and we work for separate bureaus. So Jace works for a different division than I do, but we just tend to help each other out because we're the only two in the area. So
right.
The other thing I remember about the flood is that at that point in my career, boat operation skills were not super strong with me. And so I remember just being worried that, when we had to take these boats, these little John boats out to the water treatment plant, I just remember the water being such a swirling monster that I was scared to operate my boat out there. I was scared that we'd get sucked into that swift water. And so that was a little nerve-wracking. I had a 1-year-old, my daughter was 1 year old at the time, and I just remember wanting to be home and not being able to be home.
Mm-hmm. Well, hence perhaps your Boating Officer of the Year award. You've really ramped up your skills.
Yeah, that was from a different year, but yeah.
But still, yeah. But, somebody also, and again, you write about this in the book, wanted to know if you could share a story about hunting, poaching, kind of some incident that comes to mind about, because that's from the book. It sounded like that's one of your bigger ongoing problems is poaching and illegal hunting.
Yeah, the job of a conservation officer is very dependent on what season we're in. So once fall starts is when we start dealing with hunters and, looking for poaching and that kind of activity. So I think one thing also that maybe people don't realize is that, whereas like a city cop or a law enforcement agency within a certain jurisdiction may have people that they are repeatedly dealing with, people that are continually violating laws that they constantly are having to deal with. And the same thing kind of applies to us in conservation law enforcement. There's people that I deal with every year that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And probably the main case that comes to mind, I also write about in the book, is stems from a person that I met when he was, I think, only like 11 or 12 years old. And at that point he had shot a buck out of the passenger side door. He was driving along, his dad was driving, and they were just out poaching. And his dad helped him to poach a deer that night. And from that point on, I have had several dealings with that person, and to the point where the story that I write about in the book, this person who's now older, in his 20s, is going out and running over deer with his truck, basically not even really using a gun, just going out and like literally running over deer with his truck in fields and leaving them lay. Sometimes he'd take them, sometimes he'd just leave them lay. It was kind of a game for him. So that's I guess one poaching story that was kind of an interesting investigation, because usually we're dealing with people who are shooting them, not running them down. So
what can you do? And I mean, if you have proof that he's doing that, what happens to him? What can you really do?
Well, thankfully in that case, I was able to get enough charges on him and it was taken seriously enough. I think that the crime was grisly enough for the county attorney that he ended up having his hunting privileges taken away for 10 years. So he'll be getting them back shortly, but right now he can't hunt. I mean, and a lot of these people, it doesn't matter whether they technically can't hunt or not. It's just something that they have to do. I mean, it's kind of an obsession. So even if he's suspended, I still watch for him, because sometimes people have a hard time stopping. It's almost an addiction.
Mm-hmm. In many cases, or most cases, are they actually dressing the meat and eating the meat, or is it just more the thrill of the kill?
In most cases, the poaching is happening either it's happening because people see it as a game, like how many can I kill? The other thing would be they're killing them for the antlers. So a lot of times they'll just cut the head off and take that.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about the antlers.
Yeah.
Okay. Read to us, Erika.
Okay.
That's really sad to me, but.
Okay, so one thing that I touch on in the book is the fact that law enforcement agencies in general, but very much so with our department, we're kind of a monoculture. We're not very diverse. We're white. Everybody's, there's not much ethnic diversity, but there's also not much gender diversity in our ranks. So I talk about what it's like to be a female officer in a very male-dominated field. This section that I'm going to read is really short, but we can talk about it after I read this if anybody has thoughts on it. Let's see here. Fishing game law enforcement has historically been a place crowded with men. While it's admittedly a tough time for anyone working in law enforcement, females face additional challenges. Women constantly struggle to fit in and to prove to our colleagues, the public, and ourselves that we belong. Nobody warned me that the hardest part about being a female conservation officer wasn't going to be fulfilling the job duties, but rather finding my way through a labyrinth of self-doubt. The creeping growth of nagging insecurity throughout my career was like moss smothering a dead tree. Its advance so slow, I wasn't aware of it until 10 years after my initial assignment, decomposition had set in. My looks have never inspired catcalls or inappropriate come-ons, but most problems women encounter in the workplace don't relate to one's place on a scale of perceived femininity. They relate to a combination of gender perception and narrow thinking. Almost every woman I've spoken with who wears a badge feels at one time or another that she's under the microscope. She must constantly try to prove her worth in a land of low-level chatter, telling her that she was only hired because she's female, and that she was the token woman in a field of much more qualified men. And deep down, every female officer believes it's true, because there's a good chance that it is. She may very well have been hired because they, quote unquote, needed to hire a female. So some of the stories, the book is divided into about 9 sections or 9 chapters, and each chapter I tried to fit the stories that most closely related to those chapter headings. So I have some stories that I think kind of highlight women in this career and what it's like to not necessarily fit in with your coworkers.
And you just answered a question that someone had about what barriers that arise as a female officer. One thing at the beginning of your book, you do talk about the good old boy network that you encountered, and the good old boys that were some of them on their way out when you first started, but you did work with them, and it sounded, I would imagine there was a lot of mean spirit, but it sounded like some of them you had a lot of respect for them and a lot of affection for them, and that sounded actually like you were welcome into their male cohort. Was that, am I misreading that?
No, that's correct. And I think it's strange because you would think that it would be the older guys that were on the way out that were these quote unquote good old boys who didn't feel women belonged in the field, but really that's not how I experienced it. Some of the older guys were actually much more welcoming to me than some of the new people. So I think it's really just more of a mindset that people have, you know, you're starting behind the line a little bit, because anytime a female is hired in this field, you're automatically assumed to have gotten the job because you're female. So right away out of the starting gate, you have to show that, you know, maybe that is why I got the job, but I can do it. And so some of the people that I've had the biggest struggles with are not the older generation guys. It's the newer ones coming on that feel that this is not the place for a woman to be working.
I think the older guys don't have anything left to prove. They proved it, and you know, you're not intruding on their territory. They've got great territory.
And I think that they're confident, and you know, and
exactly right. So, you're not a threat.
One of the guys that I talk about in the book, basically, there's kind of three I would put into that category. That I mean, there's more than that, but the ones I talk about in the book, obviously, Jace, I've already talked about him. You know, in law enforcement, it's really important that you have somebody that you can really trust to have your back. And he's somebody that, you know, I trust to watch out for me, and I do the same for him. One of the older guys that's now retired that I talk about in the book, it was probably 6 years into my career before anybody asked me for my opinion about one of their cases, you know, asked me for help. And that person in the book I named Lars. And I knew at that point that as soon as he asked me for what I thought of one of the cases he was working on, that I knew I'd probably have a good working relationship with him because he trusted my opinion, or he was seeking out my opinion. And that was kind of a new thing for me because really nobody had asked ever before that. So, you know, he always was, every time I would meet up with Lars, he's asking, you know, how my kids are doing. He's, you know, wanting to know what's going on in my life. And that means quite a bit too, because when in this field, you're really pretty much working on your own most of the time. You're by yourself. And so when you have somebody that you can call up and just chat with, I mean, for me, that makes a huge difference, that I can have somebody that I know, you know, likes to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the last guy I would mention is a guy that he's a younger one that was actually one of my seasonal patrol officers. He started his first weekend on the job was when there was a 12-year-old girl that was decapitated and killed on the reservoir. And he went on to work for a city law enforcement agency and then went on and got hired with us fairly recently. So again, it's kind of a fun transition to be somebody's kind of mentor and then have them come back and he can teach me all kinds of stuff now. So we work really well together, and just to have some connections with officers really helps you, you know,
right.
your career.
Yeah. So is Jason a part of the old guard?
Jace?
Uh-huh.
No, I mean, he's a park ranger, so he's not in the same division I'm in, but he's very much, you know, I guess one thing that helps is I'm drawn to people who, officers who can admit that they don't know the answer to things, or can admit that they're not, you know, perfect at their job, or, you know, that they know everything and they have some insecurities. And I think when people are honest, it just draws me to them. So Jace is very much, you know, he'll come to me with issues that he might be having with work or with, you know, a court case that he has coming up or something like that. And so we work very well together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Somebody wants to know if you would entertain the notion of signing books that she purchases, and I would assume the answer would be yes.
Yeah, I wish we could be doing this stuff, live.
Right.
Yeah, definitely would sign books.
So how could people get books to you? I guess they could send them out to you at McBride, and you could send them back. But
yeah, I wonder if
let's ask John Kenyon.
I was going to say we could share my email address, and then that person could email me, and we could connect, set something up.
If you're comfortable doing that, yeah. But,
I'm the person that asked that anyway. Tina.
Trust. Okay. Good. Somebody, here's another kind of tricky question, like the big ag question. I know funding is a real problem for the DNR, for the parks, and probably not going to get better for a while anyway. How the lack of funding, lack of staffing, what has anything affected y'all directly at McBride?
Well, again, I don't really work at McBride, but so the park budget is separate. But so what funds conservation officer work, we're a little bit different than the rest of the DNR because our funds come directly through the sales of hunting and fishing licenses, trapping licenses. So
okay, I didn't realize that. I should have.
Trust fund. So we're really dependent on those license fees, and so. Actually, I don't know the numbers. I don't know whether, I think overall hunter numbers are on the decrease, nationwide. And we really work hard to try to get people recruited and interested in doing those types of activities. And part of that is because even the funding of the wildlife areas and maintenance of those wildlife areas and planting habitat and maintaining habitat comes from those hunting and, hunting license fees.
Okay, so all the wildlife management areas.
Yeah, there's a habitat fee.
Right.
Your hunting license fees and fishing license fees that go to, maintaining the fishery. So when the coronavirus happened, we noticed a huge increase of people that were using Lake McBride State Park, and probably other state parks too, but I know that he was really inundated with, parking lots filling up, and there's not enough room for everybody and stuff. And there were a lot of people fishing, so I wouldn't be surprised if fishing license numbers were up a little bit, but I don't know about hunting.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, but one thing that you've got some show and tell. Another thing about Erika, she can write really well. Obviously, she can pilot a boat really well, but you're an artist too, Erika, and that was a real bonus for this book, to have a well-written book that comes into the press with really good art is unusual. And I know that John has got a slideshow of some of the art, but it's block prints. And can you talk to us about the process?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure what these are called. I think they're called like soft lino block prints. So they're not basically take these things that I carved in were similar to like a rubber consistency, but you carve into those with carving tools, roll ink over the top after you're finished, and then you place the paper on top of that block. Rub it, try to get the ink distributed somewhat evenly, and then you pull the paper off and you're left with that print left behind there. So that's how I did it. I thought that those lino block prints were like nice and bold and kind of, I don't know, just complemented not only the writing, but also just like visually looking at, words on the page. It helps to have something nice and bold like that.
Well, you also use them as spot art in the chapters. So each chapter has a different spot art, which it's really effective and it's really good art. How long have you been doing this?
Well, I mean, I've always enjoyed artwork. My mom was an art teacher. She's a retired art teacher. So I was like interested in art early on. But as far as lino blocks, that was somewhat new to me. I had only done a couple of those prior to starting this book, and I just really kind of enjoyed. It's kind of like a meditative thing. When you sit down to carve those, you can kind of block out everything else running through your mind, which I always have too much running through my mind. So it's nice to be able to sit there and focus on just carving. The only bad thing is if you screw up, you kind of got to start over if the screw up is bad enough, because once it's carved out of that block, it's gone. But I have had some requests for people wanting to purchase prints of those, pick the illustrations from the book. So that's been nice, is to see that people have appreciated, you know, the art. It took a lot of work and a lot of time to make those. So it was kind of a fun part of it. When I wanted to take a break from writing, I could work on that instead.
I think people would love to have these as posters or prints or cards, Erika. But, and can you print with colored ink too, or do you work on?
Yeah. So the ones that are at the heads of the chapters, like not those, whatever you call the little ones that go in between. So the bigger ones, the bigger ones like this boat that's being shown right now, and the badge, those are bigger ones that are probably about the size of I print them on 11 by 14 paper. So they, you know, I've got a couple hanging in my office at home, so they're a nice size to hang. The ones that are between the chapters that are just those little illustrations, those are I'd have to put on note cards or something, because they're too small to like hang. But
they would make great note cards. So yeah, that was just such a great bonus for your book. But one question I had, and also this is a chapter in the book, is your what the hell game. And I love the what the hell game, and I think other people would like to hear about it. Okay.
Yeah, aside from constantly saying that to myself when I see stuff people are doing, like, what the hell are they doing? One thing that they actually teach this, they kind of try to teach this skill, because oftentimes we're driving around, you know, I'm on the lookout this time of year, I'm out looking for hunters in the fields, or I'm driving through the wildlife area to see what's going on and see what people are up to. And a lot of times all that I'm really left to look for is their vehicle, because they're off in the timber, they're out in the field hunting, and I don't know where they're at, or I don't know what they're doing. And so it's very common for us as conservation officers to pull up to a vehicle that's parked in a parking lot and just go peek inside it. I mean, we don't open it, obviously, but to peek through the windows and look in and see if we can determine by what we see in the car or the truck what it is those people are up to. So when we go through our fish and game training, after we go through the police academy training, the DNR puts you through some additional training to kind of specialize in hunting and fishing enforcement and those types of things that we specialize in. And they'll kind of quiz you when you're going through field training. You'll have a field training officer there with you and walk up to a car, peek inside it, and if there's any kind of hunting equipment, anything like that, they'll want you to be able to pick up on that and be able to tell your field training officer what it is that these people are probably doing out in the field. So we're looking for things, like hunting equipment, like I said. We're looking for maybe shovels and bags when people are out digging ginseng. Timber theft is a thing now, but usually we would hear chainsaws with that. But oftentimes at Hawkeye Wildlife Area, there's people that are not hunting. I mean, the hunters are the easy ones to figure out. It's the ones that you walk up to the car and see some random, steaming piece of pizza sitting on the dash and a, Jane Austen book sitting on the passenger seat, and nobody around, or, a car full of paint cans or some weird stuff that you just are like, what in the hell is this person up to? Sometimes it's, illicit stuff happening out in the woods, and sometimes it's just, just weird stuff happening. So that's the what the hell game. If I can walk up to a car and look in the car and figure out, or at least come up with a hypothesis about what that person's doing, and then I prove myself right at some point, and then I won the game.
How often do you prove yourself right?
oftentimes I don't get the answer. I mean, I don't wait around a lot for the answer to come. Yeah. I don't write a lot of the time. I mean, especially with, the easy ones like the hunters, but it's the ones that have totally strange stuff in their car that you just have no idea.
Somebody would like to know, and I would like to know also, second book. Are you working on a second book?
Well, I'm still gathering, I'm constantly gathering stories, and if I hope I can write a second one. It'll probably be like closer to retirement maybe. But I would like to write a second one. And that's actually when I was writing this book and when I wrote the Warden's Diary, like that was actually kind of a motivating thing for me to go to work, because I knew I would not have anything to write about if I didn't go to work.
That's a new one.
Yeah, we set our own schedules for our job, and aside from having to work weekends, I mean, we set our own. So the job is kind of what you make it out to be, and if you're not very motivated, you could get away with probably not doing a whole lot. But that was one thing that helped me get out the door, is like if I want to have something I can write about, I need to actually go out and talk to people. Mm-hmm. So I'm introverted by nature, and sometimes I got to force myself. So that was helpful. So yeah, I'm still thinking of what I'm going to write about next.
That sounds great. I can't wait. Another question, the very nice question. I don't think it's from your parents either, Erika. Someone says, in your long list of achievements, what would you say would be your most rewarding accomplishment? I think the book is obviously one of them, I would say. But
of course, yeah. I think job-wise, now that I think about that, I think the most rewarding part of my job has been, or one of the most rewarding anyway, has been that every summer we, at least since I've been on, and this is likely going to change soon, but we hire on seasonal officers to help in the summer on the waterways in the state. And since I've been in Johnson County, we always have, 2 or 3 seasonal officers. Typically, these are college students that are looking to get into this field, and kind of being a mentor to them and helping them, learn along the way. And they've helped me like millions of times as well, like with my job. I think that has been really rewarding for me, to be able to see somebody like I mentioned earlier, Cole is the person what I named him in the book, to see him go from his first day on the job to now, and helping them move into the career that they want to be in and be the best that they can be, and try to set a good example for them, has always been really rewarding for me.
Was one of the seasonals somebody you surprised with a snake at one time in the book? That's Paul?
Yeah, he's
a
deputy, but yeah, he did not like snakes, and Jace doesn't like snakes either. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to surprise him with a snake.
You have to hunt pretty hard to find snakes in Iowa, but it sounds like you were able to do so.
Yeah, Jace had not long ago had a snake like a water snake, which are pretty aggressive, a northern water snake. It was living in the bottom of his John boat on Lake McBride, and he went out one day to chase down somebody that was going too fast on the water, and that snake slithered out from under his seat, and he about dove into the water instead of driving.
I think we're going to run out of time, but the funniest part of your book, Erika, is Mackenzie Wilson, your alter ego. Where did you get the idea for a wacky, kind of rule-breaking, free-spirited alter ego? You just said you were fairly introverted.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's why it's easier to come up with somebody who's not real to be the person I'm not, I guess. But that idea of having a fake social media presence is not something I made up. It's something that's pretty common in law enforcement, to be able to kind of see what's going on. A lot of people brag on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever, and they want to be able to talk about the things they've done, or if I kind of want to see, where's so-and-so at today? Are they out hunting today? I can kind of check those accounts if they've friended me, and you'd be surprised how many friend my person.
Amazing. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so you would see people say, holding up, here 2 deer we just killed. Aren't we great? On Facebook or whatever.
Yeah. And so if I see
really
that, if I see somebody that's like, let's say, holding up a deer, I mean, assuming it's in season, or even if it's not, I guess I'm going to obviously look into it. But if it's in season, I'll check our records online and make sure that they registered the deer. And if they didn't, then I have a reason to go talk to them.
So every time somebody kills a deer, they have to register?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You have to report it. You have to report it. Yeah. I don't see you out in the field hunting, Holly, but
no. Not right this minute anyway. But now that I know that your salary comes from my hunting license, not. Maybe
well, it would be nice if people who use the wildlife areas, if they would at least purchase a habitat fee. It's really, I don't know, $4 or $5, but that money, you don't have to hunt with it. It's just something that goes, that's the best way to get money into our wildlife area, purchase that habitat fee.
That's super. That I can do. Good. So it sounds, the overall impression from your book was, it's a hard job. It must get really discouraging because you're seeing damage to the land by people who should be protecting it. I think we've kind of answered this question, but what keeps you going? You obviously love being outdoors. You have a real respect for the environment. What keeps you going besides getting into your truck so you can gather stories for your next book? What brings you pleasure about your job?
Well, one thing I started doing a few years ago is I wanted to get back a little bit to doing some more environmental education, and a lot of our officers will do that portion of their job by being a mentor and taking people out hunting. That's not really my thing, so I decided that I wanted to have an after-school group. So I take a group of kids I've done it so far with Solon, so that's where I'm from, but from the Solon school system on early outs on Thursdays, and I will pile them into a van and we'll go out to a wildlife area or some type of natural area and just play and explore. So seeing those kids and my own kids, here growing up, that it gives me a little bit of hope, because I'm in the same boat as everybody else where sometimes you are hopeless. You feel like, what can I do? I'm just one person, but seeing those kids interact with the outdoors and stuff at least gives you a sense that maybe not all is lost.
Yeah, I think that's great. So that is a really good message for us to end on. I would hope at the end, you said, nobody warned me as a new officer how difficult it would be to make the best use of officer discretion. You talked a lot about how you decide, what to do. But you've learned it's your job to listen to the stories, to consider what people aren't telling me, and to determine not only what is true, but why it is true. And I think that's a really important message from your book. And I hope every law enforcement officer would take those words to heart. I really like that part of your book.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people just don't realize. That's not easy to. I find this when I'm coaching seasonals along, in their work, that you think it's good. It depends partially on your personality. If you're somebody like my husband, who's very black and white, if they've done something wrong, they should get a ticket. And if they, and it's just not that easy. So I think it's been my general impression that, most officers do struggle sometimes with how is the best way to reach this person to get the outcome that I want. Is it the best way going to be to write them a ticket? Not always. Sometimes the best way is just to talk to them, and it's an honest mistake, and to kind of take things each piece at a time, while at the same time realizing that I have to treat this person the same way I treated the last person in the situation. So you're balancing all these things every time you have a contact with somebody that somebody who's done something illegal, trying to determine what's my best course of action to get the goal that I want at the end. And it's just not a hard choice.
But so you're thinking ahead, you're thinking to the goal that you want.
Yeah, I mean, how can I get this person to comply next time? You know,
Right.
to not do this again, or to not do something worse. Some people, you know, you have to kind of make a judgment call sometimes, and some people you feel like they're going to learn this by getting a citation or by getting arrested, and other people, it's not going to take that, you know, to get the compliance that you want, to get them to respect our wildlife laws and things like that. So it just really depends, and it's not easy. And I think when people go from a seasonal job where it's really easy to say, well, you go arrest them, you're the full-time person, you arrest them, then they're full-time, and it's like, wait, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. It's not as easy to just say, well, this person deserves to go to jail, I'm taking them. So yeah, it's just a learning curve. And I think most law enforcement officers really try hard to use their discretion well and thoughtfully. Now, obviously some don't, but a lot of them out there really do try to treat everybody equally and fairly.
Well, but you also have a great understanding of the context after this time too, and you're looking at the context. How long did it take you to develop this kind of more nuanced sense of right and wrong?
I mean, it just takes a long time, and there's still times where I'm just sitting in my truck going, what do I, you know, how do I deal with this person? What do I do? And so it's just kind of a continual process, I think. Is our time up?
I think our time is up, but I'm excited, Erika, about a second book, I have to say.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Yeah. Hey, John.
Hello. I think this could go on for a long time, but we are at the top of our hour. So I wanted to thank you both. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you to Erika for writing such an interesting book and being willing to share it with us, and to Holly for leading us through a very entertaining hour. So thank you. And we have more events coming up throughout the rest of the book festival. You can check those out at iowicitybookfestival.org. And Erika, folks can contact you or learn more about your work and the book at your website, correct?
Yeah, you can go to my website, erikabillerbeck.com. If somebody wants books signed, it's erikabillerbeck@gmail.com. Erika's with a K. And so I'd be happy to sign books for whoever wants books signed, or if you want to print or whatever, I can work on that too. So
great. All right. Well, thank you both. And
thanks, kids.
For folks who enjoyed today, the video will be archived shortly, and you can share this link, and other folks can continue to watch this and enjoy. So thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, kids. Bye.